Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. Sarah stood outside the sleek, glass building, clutching her purse tightly. Her eyes scanned the polished surface of the building's entrance as she tried to calm her nerves. She had been trying to keep her small business afloat for months now, but it seemed like the harder she worked, the worse things got. Bills piled up, her employees were starting to leave, and the bank had already called about the overdue loan. It was clear that if she didn't do something drastic, her entire life's work would be gone. As Sarah walked into his office, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. She had no idea how she had gotten to this point. A few years ago, she had been running a small but successful cafe, something she had always dreamed of. Now, she was sitting in front of one of the most powerful men in the city, hoping he could solve her problems with one simple offer. She looked at him, trying to keep her composure. His face was calm, but his eyes were calculating. She had heard rumors about him, stories of his coldness and his ability to manipulate situations to his advantage. But she had no choice. She needed his help. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. A contract marriage? The thought of marrying a man like Richard seemed absurd. But what other choice did she have? She could lose everything, or she could take this chance. A temporary marriage, with no love involved. It sounded like the perfect solution to her dire situation. Sarah's mind raced. The thought of marrying a stranger for business reasons seemed so foreign to her. But in the end, she realized she had no choice. She couldn't let her family and employees down. And if this was the only way, she would do it. She felt a pang of unease, but at the same time, she could see no way out. It wasn't love, this was purely a business transaction. A chance to save everything she had worked for. She nodded slowly, her decision made. Richard smiled, a cold, calculating smile, and extended his hand to seal the deal. Then it settled. We have a marriage of convenience, Sarah. Nothing more. We keep our lives separate, and in return, your business is saved. Stay tuned, because the story has only just begun. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. Sarah stood outside the sleek, glass building, clutching her purse tightly. Her eyes scanned the polished surface of the building's entrance as she tried to calm her nerves. She had been trying to keep her small business afloat for months now, but it seemed like the harder she worked, the worse things got. Bills piled up, her employees were starting to leave, and the bank had already called about the overdue loan. It was clear that if she didn't do something drastic, her entire life's work would be gone. As Sarah walked into his office, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. She had no idea how she had gotten to this point. A few years ago, she had been running a small but successful cafe, something she had always dreamed of. Now, she was sitting in front of one of the most powerful men in the city, hoping he could solve her problems with one simple offer. She looked at him, trying to keep her composure. His face was calm, but his eyes were calculating. She had heard rumors about him, stories of his coldness and his ability to manipulate situations to his advantage. But she had no choice. She needed his help. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. A contract marriage? The thought of marrying a man like Richard seemed absurd. But what other choice did she have? She could lose everything, or she could take this chance. A temporary marriage, with no love involved. It sounded like the perfect solution to her dire situation. Sarah's mind raced. The thought of marrying a stranger for business reasons seemed so foreign to her. But in the end, she realized she had no choice. She couldn't let her family and employees down. And if this was the only way, she would do it. She felt a pang of unease, but at the same time, she could see no way out. It wasn't love, this was purely a business transaction. A chance to save everything she had worked for. She nodded slowly, her decision made. Richard smiled, a cold, calculating smile, and extended his hand to seal the deal. Then it settled. We have a marriage of convenience, Sarah. Nothing more. We keep our lives separate, and in return, your business is saved. Stay tuned, because the story has only just begun. The days after Sarah signed the contract felt like she was living in a dream. She had done it. She had agreed to marry a man she barely knew, all for the sake of saving her business and her family's future. But as the weeks went on, something unexpected started to happen. She began to see Richard in a new light. He was not just the cold, calculating businessman she had imagined him to be. There was more to him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, but something that made her heart race every time he looked at her with those intense, yet guarded eyes. Richard had kept his promise. Her business was saved, the debts were paid, and her cafe was back on track. She couldn't deny the relief that washed over her every time she thought about it. The weight of financial stress that had been crushing her for so long was gone. But there was another weight now, one that was harder to carry, the growing tension between her and Richard. Every evening, they would attend galas or business meetings as a couple. She wore the elegant dresses, the ones that made her feel like she didn't belong. He, always the picture of perfect control, guided her through each event with grace, making it look effortless. At first, it was just an arrangement, nothing more. But now, as she stood beside him at a charity auction, her heart skipped a beat when he whispered, "You look beautiful tonight, Sarah." She tried to brush it off, to convince herself that it was just another compliment. After all, they weren't a real couple. But there was something in his voice, something different, that made her question her own feelings. She wasn't sure if it was his sincerity or if it was just the loneliness she had been feeling that was making her read too much into it. The nights were the hardest. After the events, they would return to the grand, empty house that was now their home. The vastness of it only served to highlight the distance between them. He would retreat to his study, and she would find herself in the quiet living room, wondering if she had made the right choice. But every time she asked herself that question, the answer was clear. She had no other option. This was her chance to rebuild her life, and she wasn't going to let anything, especially her growing feelings for Richard, get in the way of that. One evening, after a particularly lavish event, Sarah couldn't sleep. She wandered into the living room, trying to push away the thoughts that kept circling in her mind. The house was silent, the only sound being the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She stopped in front of the grand piano, her fingers lightly brushing over the keys. Music had always been her escape, the one thing that calmed her when life felt overwhelming. She had just begun to play a soft melody when she heard footsteps behind her. She stopped, her heart racing. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Richard's voice broke the silence, his tone as calm as ever. He stood in the doorway, his presence filling the space. "You didn't," Sarah replied softly, turning around to face him. "I was just trying to clear my head." Richard walked over and sat down next to her on the couch, his gaze fixed on her. "You're doing well, Sarah," he said. "Better than I expected, actually. Your business is thriving again, and I can see how much it means to you." She smiled faintly, but her heart felt heavy. "I don't know how I would have managed without you," she said quietly. Richard didn't respond immediately. He seemed to be considering her words carefully. Then, after a long pause, he spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I didn't do this for any reason other than to help. But I'm glad I could. You've worked hard, Sarah. I can respect that." She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. Richard wasn't one to show much emotion, especially not when it came to personal matters. This was the first time she had truly felt that he saw her as more than just a business arrangement. Her pulse quickened, and she quickly looked away, afraid he might see the confusion in her eyes. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure of how to respond. The next few days felt different. There was an unspoken tension between them, one that neither of them addressed. Sarah found herself thinking about Richard more and more. His compliments, the way he seemed to understand her in a way no one else had. But still, she kept her distance. After all, they weren't supposed to fall in love. This was just a business deal. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder if it was already too late. Had she already started to fall for him? Or was she simply caught up in the idea of a perfect, unattainable love? She didn't have the answers, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to know. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the silence was deafening. Sarah felt the weight of her emotions pressing on her chest. "Richard," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "what happens when the contract ends?" What happens to us? He looked at her, his expression unreadable. We go our separate ways, he said, his voice flat. Just like we agreed. No strings attached. But as she looked into his eyes, Sarah knew there was more to it than that. There had to be. Stay tuned for what happens next. The story is far from over. It had been weeks since Sarah and Richard had made their arrangement official. The deal was clear, the boundaries well defined. Yet, as time went on, something within Sarah began to shift. She couldn't deny it anymore. The connection between them, the chemistry that simmered just beneath the surface, was real. But she still tried to keep her distance, convincing herself it was all just part of the arrangement. After all, there was no room for love in a marriage built on business. Or was there? The more time Sarah spent with Richard, the more she found herself questioning her own feelings. The man who had once seemed like a cold, distant businessman had become someone she saw differently. She had caught glimpses of vulnerability in him, moments when his facade slipped. At dinner one night, as they sat together at the long, polished dining table in their grand home, Richard asked her about her day. It wasn't the usual small talk. There was genuine curiosity in his voice. "How's the cafe doing?" he asked, his eyes locking with hers. "You've worked so hard to get it back on track." He leaned back in his chair, his hands folded in front of him. Sarah was surprised by the question. In all their interactions, they had mostly talked about business, about the contract, about keeping up appearances. This was the first time Richard had asked her something personal. She looked at him, taking in his serious expression. The man who had agreed to this arrangement with no strings attached was now looking at her like he cared. "It's doing well," she said, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It feels good to see it back in business. But it's still a lot of work. I never imagined it would take this much to get everything back on track. It's been exhausting." She paused, realizing just how much she had been relying on him lately. The cafe, her life. He had been the one to save it. "I guess I owe you everything for that," she added quietly. Richard didn't respond immediately. He just stared at her, his expression softening. There was something in his gaze that she hadn't seen before, something almost tender. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Sarah quickly changed the subject, afraid of what might slip out if they lingered on this too long. "It's not just the cafe, though," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I'm still getting used to this life. Living here, being married to you in this way. It feels so unnatural." She looked down at her hands in her lap, nervously twisting the napkin. "It's strange, Richard. I keep reminding myself that this is all just temporary, just a deal. But sometimes it doesn't feel like that." She felt her heart race, realizing she had just said too much. Richard remained quiet for a long moment, then finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "I understand," he said. "This isn't easy for either of us. But I promise you, Sarah, this arrangement is only temporary. We agreed on that. Once your business is back on its feet, once everything is in place, we can both move on." He paused and added, "But until then, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." His words were calm, but there was a hint of something deeper beneath the surface. Was it reassurance? Or was it something more? Sarah looked up at him, her breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she wondered if Richard felt the same way. She had been so focused on keeping her distance, on maintaining the boundaries they had set, that she hadn't stopped to consider that maybe, just maybe, he was feeling more than he let on. Could it be possible that this marriage, this contract, had evolved into something more for him too? That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her mind was racing with questions, doubts, and feelings she had tried to suppress for so long. What did it mean that Richard had cared about her cafe? What did it mean that he had promised her that he wouldn't leave? Her thoughts were a tangled mess of confusion and desire. She knew that her feelings for him were growing, but she wasn't sure if it was because of the situation they were in or because she had truly started to care about him. The next morning, as she made her way to the kitchen, she found Richard standing by the counter, sipping coffee. He looked up as she entered, offering her a quiet smile. "Good morning," he said softly. "How did you sleep?" His voice was different today, gentler, more open. Sarah hesitated, her mind still caught in the whirlwind of her emotions. "Not well," she admitted. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us." She paused, unsure how to proceed. The words felt strange, but she had to speak them. "I don't know what this is anymore. I don't know where the lines are anymore." She looked up at him, waiting for a response. Richard set down his cup of coffee and walked toward her, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But I think I want to find out." He reached out and gently cupped her cheek, his touch soft but firm. "You're not alone in this, Sarah. Not anymore." The moment felt suspended in time. The tension that had been building between them was now palpable. Was this the moment everything would change? Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she realized she was no longer just part of a business deal. She was a part of something much bigger. And so was Richard. Stay tuned as the story continues to unfold. Days passed, and Sarah could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The boundaries between her and Richard were blurring more with each passing day. What started as a business arrangement, a marriage of convenience, was now something more. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The way he looked at her, the small gestures of kindness he showed, the way he was always there when she needed him. Richard was no longer just the man who saved her business. He was something else, something she didn't know how to define. One evening, after another charity gala they had attended together, Sarah found herself in the kitchen, preparing a late-night snack. The house was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the stillness. Richard had retreated to his study again, as he usually did after events. She had grown used to these quiet moments alone, but tonight felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them, that the walls they had carefully built around their fake marriage were starting to crumble. As she stood at the counter, cutting vegetables for a salad, she heard footsteps behind her. Richard entered the kitchen, his presence immediately filling the space. He wasn't dressed in his usual formal wear anymore. He was in casual clothes, his sleeves rolled up, looking more relaxed than she had seen him in a long time. "I thought you might be hungry," Sarah said, her voice hesitant. "I made some food. It's not much, but it's perfect," Richard interrupted, his voice soft. He stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Sarah, I know we agreed this would be temporary, that it was just a deal. But the more time we spend together, the more I realize that I don't want to go back to how things were before. I don't want to just be your business partner, your fake husband. I want more than that." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had known this moment would come. But hearing him say it out loud made it all the more real. She looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Was he serious? Could this really be happening? Was it possible that Richard had started to feel something for her too? "Richard," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't have to do this. We made a deal. We agreed this was just about business. We don't have to complicate it." He reached out, his hand gently lifting her chin so she was forced to meet his gaze. "I don't want to complicate things," he said, his voice low and steady. "But I can't pretend anymore. I care about you, Sarah, more than I should, and I think you feel the same way." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Sarah felt the truth of them deep in her chest. She had tried to deny it, to keep her emotions at bay, but now she could no longer ignore the feelings that had grown inside her. She had started to care for Richard, too, in ways that went beyond what they had agreed upon. She had thought that time would give her clarity, that it would make the decision easier. But now, it only made it harder. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. This isn't what I expected. I came into this thinking it was just a business deal, and now I'm not sure what this is." Richard smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I didn't expect it either. But sometimes life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" He took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "I never thought I would fall for someone like you, Sarah. But here I am, and I don't want to walk away from this. From us." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah's mind was racing, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never imagined that she would find herself in this position. But now that she was here, she realized that there was no easy answer. Was it possible to take a step beyond the contract, beyond the business arrangement they had made? Could they have something real, something genuine, despite how it all began? "I'm scared," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to get hurt." Richard gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "I won't hurt you, Sarah. I promise." His voice was firm, yet soft, filled with sincerity. "We don't have to figure this all out right now. We can take it slow. But what I'm offering you is real. And I hope you'll take that chance with me." For the first time since this whole arrangement had started, Sarah felt like she was standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. But as she looked into Richard's eyes, she realized that maybe, just maybe, the path that led to him wasn't one she wanted to walk away from. The tension between them was palpable, the air thick with unspoken words and emotions. Sarah's heart beat faster, and without thinking, she took a small step forward, closing the gap between them. She placed her hand gently on his chest, feeling the warmth of his body under her palm. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "But maybe we can find out together." Richard's smile widened, and he leaned in, brushing his lips against hers in a kiss that was soft at first, but quickly deepened, filled with all the emotions they had both been holding back. Stay tuned, because this story is just beginning to unfold. Days passed, and the distance between Sarah and Richard seemed to vanish with each passing moment. What had started as an agreement, a mere business arrangement, had blossomed into something much more complicated, something neither of them had anticipated. They spent more time together, shared more than just professional moments, and slowly, the walls they had built around themselves began to crumble. Still, Sarah couldn't help but question everything. Could this really be real? Was she falling for him because of the situation, or was it something deeper? One evening, as they sat together in the living room after a long day of meetings, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Richard, who had always maintained a calm, collected demeanor, was unusually quiet. Sarah noticed it immediately. The man who had always kept his emotions hidden was now sitting across from her, his fingers idly tracing the rim of his glass, his eyes distant. She had grown used to the subtle shifts in his mood, but tonight, something felt different. "What's on your mind?" she asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, tentative, afraid that the question might be too much. Richard looked up at her, and for a moment, there was hesitation in his eyes. Then, with a sigh, he set the glass down and leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her face. "I've been thinking about this, about us," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I promised you this would be temporary. But now, I'm not so sure if that's what I want anymore." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had expected him to stick to the original terms, the deal they had made, but hearing him say this felt like a challenge to everything she had convinced herself was true. "Richard," she began, but he held up a hand, silencing her. "I don't want to complicate things," he said, his tone soft but firm. "But I can't pretend anymore. What we have, what I feel for you, it's not just about business. It's real, and I need you to know that." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah was silent, unsure how to respond. She had never imagined that this contract, this fake marriage, would lead to a place where emotions were involved. She had been careful not to let herself fall for him, but now, she realized that she had already crossed that line. "I don't know what to say," Sarah confessed, her voice shaky as she tried to process everything. "I didn't plan for this. I didn't expect to feel this way about you. It was supposed to be just a business deal, Richard." Richard's eyes softened, and he stood up, walking toward her. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, tilting her head so that she was forced to look up at him. "I didn't plan for this either," he said, his voice low and steady. "But I can't deny what I'm feeling, and I won't hide it from you anymore." Sarah felt a mix of emotions flooding her chest. Fear, confusion, desire, everything was rushing through her at once. "What if this ruins everything?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if we can't go back to how things were? What if we can't go back to the deal we made?" Richard's gaze never wavered. "We can't go back," he said softly. "But that doesn't mean we can't move forward. Together." He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was slow and tender, filled with all the unspoken feelings that had been building between them. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise, a realization of everything they had both been holding back. When they pulled away, Sarah looked at him, her breath catching in her throat. She knew there was no turning back now. Whatever this was, whatever they had built together, it wasn't just a contract anymore. It was real, and it was something she didn't want to lose. "I don't know what this will look like," Sarah said, her voice steadying, "but I want to try. I want to try with you." Richard smiled, his hand still resting on her cheek. "That's all I need to hear." The days that followed were a blur. They continued to attend business events, but now there was a new sense of closeness between them. The walls they had built around their relationship had completely crumbled, and they found themselves slipping into a new dynamic, one that was both exciting and terrifying at the same time. Every moment spent together felt like it was leading them somewhere they couldn't yet fully understand. And yet, neither of them was ready to stop. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, an unexpected phone call would turn their world upside down. Stay tuned as the story takes another turn and new challenges arise. It had been a week since Richard and Sarah's conversation, and although they had agreed to take things slow, something had shifted. The tension between them had turned into something undeniable. Their fake marriage had evolved into something real, something neither of them had planned for. They spent their days together, working on business, attending events, and then retreating to their home, which now felt more like a shared space than just a house. The lines between business partners, spouses, and something more had blurred beyond recognition. One afternoon, Sarah sat in the living room, flipping through paperwork, trying to finalize a new project for the cafe. The soft sound of Richard's footsteps interrupted her concentration. He stood in the doorway of the room, watching her. For a moment, his expression unreadable. Sarah looked up and smiled, a warm, comfortable smile she hadn't realized had become natural over the past week. "Hey," she said, her voice light, though her heart was racing. "How's the meeting?" Richard smiled in return, but there was a certain sadness in his eyes that made Sarah pause. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "It went well," he said, though there was a distant quality to his voice. "But I wanted to talk to you about something." His words were calm, but Sarah could sense a shift. He wasn't usually one to act so serious unless something was weighing heavily on his mind. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, setting the papers down and giving him her full attention. She had grown to care for him in ways that she wasn't prepared for, and she had come to realize that Richard's troubles were her troubles, his burdens her own. Richard walked into the room, sitting beside her on the couch. He took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking about everything. The business, the contract, and us." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "I know we agreed to keep things professional, to keep it all about the business. But I don't know how to separate my feelings anymore, Sarah." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. His words hung in the air, filling the room with a mixture of tension and hope. She had been waiting for him to say this, but hearing him actually say it made her realize how deeply she had fallen into this unexpected relationship. "Richard," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you saying you want to end the contract? To make this real?" He shook his head slightly, as though unsure of his own feelings. "I don't want to end it, not exactly. I don't want to hide anymore. I don't want to keep pretending that this is just a business deal when it's not. I care about you, Sarah. I care about us. And I think it's time we stop pretending that we don't feel what we feel." The weight of his words hit Sarah harder than she had expected. She had tried so hard to keep things professional, to stick to the plan they had set. But now, with Richard's confession, everything seemed so much more complicated. Could they really go beyond the deal they had made? Could they risk everything, business, family, and reputation, for something that had started out as a lie? "I've been trying to keep it all straight in my head," Sarah said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to fall for you, Richard." Her words were barely above a whisper, but they held all the truth she had been hiding from herself. "But I have, and I don't know what to do with that." Richard reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to do anything, Sarah," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I don't expect you to have all the answers. I just needed you to know that I'm not pretending anymore. This isn't a contract for me. It's real. It's always been real, even if I didn't want to admit it at first." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without the business mask, without the formality. What they had wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And for the first time, she realized that she wasn't afraid of it anymore. "I don't want to be afraid either," Sarah whispered, her heart finally accepting the truth she had been running from. "I want this to be real. With you. But we have to take it slow, Richard. We can't rush this. We can't just throw away everything we've worked for." Richard smiled softly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I don't want to rush it either. We'll take it one step at a time. No pressure. Just us." The tension that had once been between them had melted away, replaced with something deeper, something more lasting. Sarah felt her heart swelling in her chest as she realized that what they had was no longer a transaction. It was a partnership that was built on trust, mutual respect, and, for the first time, love. They sat there in silence, the weight of the moment sinking in. Sarah had no idea what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt like it didn't matter. What mattered was the present. And for the present, they were together. Stay tuned, because the journey is far from over. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind. Sarah and Richard's relationship was no longer just a contract. It had blossomed into something real, something neither of them had expected. They had begun to share their hopes, their fears, and their dreams, allowing the walls they had built to protect themselves to come down. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, reality came crashing down. A problem from Richard's past suddenly resurfaced, threatening to destroy everything they had worked for. One evening, Sarah was sitting in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when Richard walked in, his face unusually tense. She noticed the change immediately. He wasn't the calm, collected man she had grown used to. His brow was furrowed, and his jaw clenched. Sarah set the knife down and looked at him, her stomach tightening with anxiety. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Richard ran a hand through his hair, his eyes avoiding hers for a moment. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice low. "Something I've been trying to keep hidden, but I can't anymore." Sarah's heart raced as she tried to read his expression. "What is it?" she asked, stepping closer to him. She had come to trust him completely, and the last thing she wanted was for him to shut her out. Richard took a deep breath, his eyes finally meeting hers. "You know I've been successful in business. But what you don't know is that it wasn't always easy. There are people from my past who I've had to distance myself from. And one of them is coming back into the picture." Sarah frowned, unsure of what he was trying to say. "Who?" Richard's voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper. "My father. He's back, and he's been trying to get into my business dealings for months. He's a dangerous man, Sarah. I've kept him out of my life for a reason. But now he's threatening everything. My business, my reputation, everything we've built together." The weight of his words hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. She had known Richard had a complicated past, but she had no idea it ran this deep. "What do you mean he's threatening everything?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "How is he involved in all of this?" Richard's face hardened. "He wants to take over. He's been trying to undermine my company for years, and now, he's using legal means to do it. He's found a loophole that could jeopardize everything I've worked for, and if I don't comply with his demands, he'll take me to court and make sure I lose everything." Sarah's mind was spinning. She hadn't expected this, hadn't imagined that Richard's past could come back to haunt them so suddenly. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Richard looked at her with a mixture of frustration and helplessness. "I don't know. I've tried everything to keep him out of my life. But now, he's using everything at his disposal to tear us apart. If he gets what he wants, everything we've worked for will be destroyed. The business, the home, us." For a moment, Sarah felt the weight of his words settle into her chest. They had come so far, built something that felt so real, and now, it was all in jeopardy because of someone from Richard's past. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "We'll fight him, Richard. We'll figure this out together. You don't have to do this alone." Richard's expression softened, and for the first time in days, he looked vulnerable. "I don't want to drag you into this. It's my mess, not yours. But I can't lose you, Sarah. I can't lose what we've built." Sarah stepped forward, placing a hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingers. "You won't lose me," she said softly, looking up at him. "We're in this together, remember? We'll fight this. We'll figure it out. No matter what happens, we'll face it side by side." Richard nodded slowly, his eyes full of gratitude. He reached out, pulling her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "I don't know what I'd do without you." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning of the real fight. They had come this far together, and they would do whatever it took to protect the life they had started to build. But the path ahead was uncertain, and they would need to be stronger than ever to face the challenges that awaited them. Stay tuned as the next chapter unfolds. The fight is just beginning. In the days that followed, Sarah and Richard worked tirelessly, trying to find a way to stop Richard's father from destroying everything they had built. The threat was real, and Richard's father had powerful allies, making their fight feel more like an uphill battle with every passing hour. But despite the odds, they stood together, facing the looming storm as a team. Sarah could see how much this was taking a toll on Richard. He had always been strong, but this situation was pushing him to his limits. She could feel the weight of it, too, as the pressure mounted with each passing day. One evening, after another long day of meetings and strategy sessions, Richard stood by the window, staring out at the city below. Sarah watched him for a moment, her heart aching for him. She knew how much he hated feeling vulnerable, but he had opened up to her in ways she hadn't expected. She had become his anchor, and now, he needed her more than ever. "Richard," she said softly, walking over to him. He didn't turn around immediately, but she could see his shoulders tense as he sensed her presence. "You don't have to carry this on your own. We'll figure this out, together." He finally turned to face her, his expression worn and tired. "I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this fight going, Sarah," he said, his voice strained. "My father is relentless, and every move I make seems to make things worse. I don't want to drag you into this, but I don't know what else to do." Sarah took his hands in hers, her grip firm, grounding him in the moment. "I'm already in this with you, Richard. You don't have to protect me from this. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." She paused for a moment, looking up at him. "I believe in us. I believe in you." Richard's eyes softened, the tension in his face easing just a bit as he held her gaze. "You really mean that, don't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded. "I do. You're not alone in this." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation, but at the same time, a surge of strength from being with him. "We'll fight, Richard, and we'll win. I don't care what it takes. We're stronger than this." For the first time in days, Richard smiled. It wasn't much, but it was enough to reassure her that he was still fighting, still holding on to the hope that they could make it through this. He pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly, as if afraid to let go. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't deserve you, but I'm so glad you're here with me." Sarah wrapped her arms around him, resting her head on his chest. "You don't have to deserve me, Richard. We're in this because we chose to be, and I'm not going anywhere." The next few days were filled with back-and-forth meetings with lawyers, trying to find a legal loophole that could stop Richard's father from taking over. It felt like a chess match, each move more critical than the last. Richard and Sarah worked tirelessly together, but the strain was starting to show. Richard had always been the one in control, but now, as the pressure mounted, Sarah could see the cracks in his armor. One night, after a particularly grueling day, Sarah found Richard sitting alone in the study, his face buried in his hands. The exhaustion was visible, and the weight of the battle had clearly taken its toll on him. Sarah walked over to him, sitting down beside him and placing a hand gently on his back. "You're doing everything you can," she said softly. "I know it's hard, but you don't have to do this alone. We'll get through it. We'll find a way." Richard lifted his head, his eyes red from lack of sleep, but there was a fire in them that hadn't been there before. "I don't know what I would do without you, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been my strength when I've had none left. I don't deserve that, but I'm grateful for it." Sarah smiled, wiping away the stray tear that had fallen from his cheek. "You don't need to deserve me. You're more than enough. And we're going to get through this, no matter what it takes." And as they sat there together, the storm still raging outside, they knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened next, they would face it side by side. Their bond had been forged in the fire of adversity, and together, they would fight to the end. Stay tuned as the battle continues, and Richard and Sarah discover what it truly means to fight for love, family, and everything they've worked for. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless meetings. Sarah and Richard's fight to protect the life they had built together continued, but the pressure was beginning to take its toll. Richard's father was relentless, using every tool at his disposal to undermine them. But with every setback, Sarah and Richard only grew closer, their bond stronger than ever. They faced each challenge together, side by side, and each small victory felt like a giant leap forward. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the endgame. After weeks of legal battles, court dates, and tense negotiations, they had found a way to stop Richard's father from taking control of his business. It wasn't easy, and it came at a price. But they had won. The battle was over. The future they had fought so hard to protect was now secure. Sarah stood by the window of their home, looking out at the city below. The storm that had once seemed so overwhelming now felt like a distant memory. The weight that had hung over them for so long had finally lifted, and with it came a sense of peace. But as Sarah gazed out at the skyline, she couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. Richard walked up behind her, his presence as comforting as ever. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "We made it through." Sarah turned to face him, a smile tugging at her lips. "I never doubted we would," she said, her voice soft but confident. "We've been through too much for it to end any other way." Richard stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I don't think I could have done this without you," he said, his gaze intense. "You were my strength when I had none left. You were the one who kept me going, kept me fighting." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "I've always believed in us, Richard. We're stronger than anything that comes our way." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as though afraid to let go. For a moment, they simply stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, savoring the quiet after the storm. As the days passed, life slowly returned to normal. The business was secure, and they could finally focus on what came next. But what had started as a marriage of convenience had blossomed into something so much more. Sarah realized that she had not only found a partner in business, but in life. She had found someone who believed in her, someone who was willing to fight for her, someone who loved her in ways she never thought possible. Richard, too, had changed. The man who had once been driven only by success and ambition had become someone who understood that love, trust, and family were worth more than any business deal or victory. Together, they had built something real, something lasting. One evening, as they sat together in their favorite spot by the fireplace, Richard turned to Sarah, his eyes soft with affection. "There's still so much I want to do with you," he said, his voice filled with promise. "So many things I want to share, so many dreams I want us to build together." Sarah smiled, her heart full of hope for the future. "We have all the time in the world," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "And we'll do it together. Whatever comes next, we face it as a team." And so, as the fire crackled in the background and the night stretched out before them, Sarah and Richard knew that their journey was far from over. They had faced their darkest moments and come out stronger on the other side. And now, with the world at their feet, they were ready to face whatever came next, together. This is where their story ends, but for Sarah and Richard, it was only the beginning.